I like the symbolism that Oliver is trying to incorporate in his retelling because the last prologue we had, so Act Four's prologue, we saw Colburn and Oliver by the lake, which is the scene of the crime, which is where madness had happened on numerous occasions, not just the scene of the crime, not just them deciding to let Richard die, but also during the Macbeth performance. That is where a lot of things had happened. So that is their Dante's Inferno. But now in the prologue of Act 5, they're ascending to the tower. They're enlightening. This is their purgatory kind of moment, is what he's trying to clarify, that he's about to enlighten Colburn of the final details. This is the act where he will finally enlighten him on who did it, even though I'm pretty sure it's still a lie. But again, we never know because Oliver is an unreliable narrator. Maybe he is being honest and, James really did do it, but everything surrounding the information is false. We don't know, and it drives me crazy, but simultaneously love this book for that reason. I also like that in this moment, there's a blurring the lines between reality and fiction for him in a different sense, because unlike in any of the other moments where there's slight reminiscing to it, it is only on the stairs when he sees the door slightly cracked, as if someone had rushed out. Him, James, 20-something, rushed out to go to the theater, to go to the boar's head, etc. I feel like he is trapped in the memory and he feels like that is part of reality. So I love that even though Oliver's trying to say that he is, has the reins of this story, the line between reality and fiction is still blurred, and it's more apparent when he is on this campus than anywhere else, that you get sucked into this vortex almost. Then Oliver says, "It hasn't rusted the way I have," speaking about the door where he pushes it open, but I think it's a perfect representation that this is an institution, this is a place that for the most part stands the same. Not much changes as fast as like the humans do. You can come back, alumni can come back, and for the most part it looks the same. There obviously will be changes because that's what happens over time, but for him, he may not even notice the changes because this was the happiest and the worst place of his life. Actually, I would consider the happiest, even though it led to him going to prison. He would still consider this the happiest part of his life. So he is looking at it still with rose-colored glasses. I also had this realization that it's the formatting of the story, especially the prologues more specifically, is kind of like Wuthering Heights, because Wuthering Heights is told with this newcomer coming to the neighborhood, renting out this home, and the housekeeper is the one to tell him the story of Wuthering Heights, the home that he'd gone to visit his neighbor, where Heathcliff still resides. And the only difference is, while Nell is, yes, part of that story, and that's why she's able to tell it, she is not as active of a participant in that story as Oliver is. But Oliver tries to portray himself like he isn't so active in this story, at least not until Act 5. This line from Oliver is absolutely perfect because as he steps in the room, sees the bed, see that obviously students have been staying here, it's stripped bare, James's bed, goes touch it, and he says the room is just a room. And that is the point of this entire story. This is just a place. He tries to claim in all his other prologues and all these other moments that get wrapped up in this toxic environment, this vortex of a university where they get so deep in the Shakespeare and everything that they have lost themselves along the way. But in reality, it's just the university. It's just a room. It was all them. They made this vortex. The university didn't, which then goes into Oliver's theme of fate versus agency, because he continuously tries to push the agency on everyone but himself and his fellow classmates. I also love how fitting that Oliver and James's room have the perfect view of the lake, which, one, it could hint to maybe James actually did do it, that he was up in his room as he had said and he had saw Richard. I don't know. Maybe James had seen Oliver go after Richard from that view. I don't know. But going back, it is a very gothic element. It's perfect. The thing that's haunting you at the window, the thing that's waiting for you at the window. Again, going back to Wuthering Heights, you have Kathy's ghost banging on the window, which leads to the entire tale. You have so many stories like that of things waiting, lurking just beyond your window. When Colburn says that he never understood Oliver and James, and Oliver said, "Neither did we," I think it's a perfect representation of a lot of a modern look on a lot of classic Shakespeare and even Greek mythology, where There are typically two male characters are so close, and even female characters sometimes, that you wonder, is it truly platonic? Is it brotherly love? Or is it romantic? Case in point, Achilles and Patroclus, which is why I associated the two of them, especially because after I listened to this for the first time as an audiobook, the very next audiobook I listened to was the Song of Achilles, and I saw a lot of similarities between those four characters. And I think it's fascinating because if you look back on just the information, you can see that, is it romantic? Is it not? Was it always a platonic brotherly love, but Oliver's twisting it this time in this version of his retelling to be more romantic? And that's what makes the story really brilliant, especially those classic stories where you could argue and twist it and wonder and see things that maybe weren't there. This line, Oliver saying, "I stuck to him like a burr from the day we met, hoping some of his brilliance might rub off on me," is him perfectly telling us, but is sandwiched around all these other things that you may not realize, his obsession with James. And he told us in the very beginning that he was possessive of James. And I think it's him kind of telling us without telling us that he saw James as his typecasting, that perfect hero prince, and he idolized them and he wanted to be him. He hoped some of it would rub off. And then as this book has continued, that mask has started to fall. The real James started to emerge, and Oliver didn't like it. And that's when he starts getting more angry with James. What Oliver says in response to Culber when he asked why did James, like him, Oliver says, this is guesswork, of course, but I think James liked me for the opposite reason that I liked him. Everyone called me nice. But in reality, they really meant was naive. I was naive and impressionable and shockingly ordinary. But I was just clever enough to keep up with him, so he let me. And here he is trying to lay the groundwork of, I was just clever enough to keep up that he let me, that James is clever, that James admitted his crime, because that is the version of the story that Oliver is trying to tell. But also in this version, he is trying to diminish himself and himself as a suspect by saying that he is ordinary and naive, but also constantly he is trying to tell us that he was just a nice guy. But honestly, when you look back on his actions throughout this book, there is not a moment that shows that he's actually genuinely a nice guy. Yes, he would jump in and protect someone, but that is done, I think, out of possessiveness. He is not, comforting or caring or thinking about other people's emotions that much. He's not concerned for Ren. He's not concerned for Meredith. He's not concerned for James, besides what he can get out of them. So he's not a nice guy. Again, this read-through, I am viewing Oliver with a very negative lens than I have in the last couple times I read this book, if you haven't noticed. Okay, Colburn, because he says, can I give you my guess? I think he was so enamored with you because you were enamored with him, which is fascinating. Because according to Oliver, it looks like he looked up to James. He idolized him. And then when he started drifting away, he didn't like that. In a very Meredith-like way, that Meredith desires to be worshipped. So does James in this sense. But it also is fascinating because there is someone else I listened to. She has a YouTube series where she talked about, Jane Austen stories. And the reason why Henry Tilney from Northanger Abbey fell in love with Catherine Morland, at first he didn't. It wasn't, eyes met, immediate attraction. He fell in love with her because she loved him. It was because she really liked him that he went, she's a nice girl, and slowly, steadily fell in love with her. So that could be the case here too, and I kind of like that it's not an instant thing. It's a slow thing that you see the possibility thanks to someone else. But again, it could also not be romantic. It could be, the reason why James doesn't like Meredith is that he kind of is like Meredith in a male form, which I've never thought of until this moment. So the last time I read this book, I annotated it, and I have this lovely orange post-it note I left for myself, and I'm going to read it off because I've talked about love and obsession in this post-it note, and I have Richard's love for his girls led to his destructive obsession that destroyed him. What if James or Oliver's love is really an obsession of one another, leading to their mutual destructions? What if Meredith is obsessive with Oliver, the good guy version of Richard, because they look a little alike, and she didn't want to be alone. Lucky for him, I don't know what I put here. It is a very interesting thing of love and obsession. I'm glad I noticed it last time. I'm glad I'm noticing it this time, and it's a theme in a lot of Shakespeare plays is love and obsession. And are they exclusive, or are they could be together? Like that whole emotions of, can you love someone but be obsessed with them? Is obsession truly love? And things like that. Oh, Oliver, ever the actor, ever the playwright that you're trying to be. Because when Coburn says, when you say more than friends, I wait, yes? He abandons the attempt. I suppose it doesn't matter, but I can't help wondering. I give him a smile, nondescript enough that he will probably go on wondering about this much, at least, for a good long while. He wants this. He wants to leave things a little ambiguous still, because he enjoys fucking with people in this way. That's why I think he likes Shakespeare. That's why we all like Shakespeare, because it's just ambiguous enough in certain senses that we could spend centuries arguing about the plays. And that is what he's trying to do here. Oliver also gives himself an out by critiquing in a very subtle way of Coburn by saying that, Coburn would never understand. He is a father of two, like blah, 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 blah. That he is not elite and sophisticated and artistic enough to understand. And I think that this is him talking to the readers, because if we go with my other theory, my new theory, which is that this is not actively happening in the moment, as I had thought previously with the prologues, but this is him writing all this down, say, a few years later, to then publish and give to us, the readers, the world. It's him saying that they would never understand, but you guys, you can read between the lines. You understand. Yet simultaneously, he says, what were we then? In 10 years, I have not yet found an adequate word to describe us. And that is him also giving himself an out, because then he doesn't have to pick one thing, because it's a lie. He doesn't have to lie to us by saying exactly what it was, by leaving it ambiguous. He's not lying to us, but letting us fill in the blanks. At the end of this prologue, what is fascinating is that it's not focused on the group. It's not focused on the crime itself, which is the point of the story. This prologue focuses on him and James's relationship, which means that there is something a lot more going on here than we know, whether it's because he's trying to set up James as the suspect here, as this version of the story is, or it's maybe him trying to describe his own motives. If, say, Oliver did it, if he saw what Richard was doing, the abuse that he was, the abuse of Richard towards James, maybe he was retaliating to protect James because he was obsessive and possessive of him. So, who knows? But it's fascinating that this chapter, or this prologue, is focused solely on Oliver and James in this room where you can say it's another vortex within a vortex of them being so indoctrinated with one another that led to certain events. Possibly, I think it's him steadily trying to tell us slightly his motivations if Oliver had committed this crime, for instance. The opening line to Act 5, Scene 1, where Oliver's describing how the fourth year is finally walking through their new set, but it's almost melancholy that they shuffle in through the wings one by one, numb to the usually exciting prospect of a new set. And it kind of always reminded me a little bit of Mike Flanagan's shows, or Mike Flanagan's Fall of the House of Usher. Now, admittedly, I was just watching a video essay about that one, but there's an element in Gothics where the characters just hit their breaking point, where everything is just too much and they are numb. They don't feel, they're just going through the motions because they've just been thrown so much at them at that point, and they're breaking. And in my opinion, I think Gothics are close kissing cousins to Dark Academia. Both the genres kind of take these characters with very heightened negative traits of characters, and they're thrown into situations, whether it is the intensity of a private college or a haunted house or whatever it is, and they just push and push and push and push till these characters break. And that's what we're seeing here, and it's very fascinating because up to this point we've seen these characters with an exaggerated emotions. They were encouraged by Gwendolyn to have exaggerated emotions, but yet here they are numb. I'm also curious about Oliver, what Oliver says here. He doesn't expand on it. He just very briefly says Alexander's back from the clinic. He brought up the rear, hollowed-eyed, stiff and lifeless, a walking cadaver. He looked so utterly broken that I hadn't yet had the heart or perhaps the nerve to confront him about anything. What do you have to confront him about? If it was, say, overdose, if it was, say, his guilt of the situation, why do you need to confront him? Why aren't you comforting him? What aren't you telling us? I absolutely love this set for the symbolism of it, because there's so many mirrors on this set, and mirrors typically represent the truth. Like, you're confronting the truth of yourself. And this set is gonna force these characters to confront the truth, as we eventually, at the end, they're literally on this set when someone is about to be arrested, and they are confronted not only with their feelings in case of Oliver and James, if that is true, but also to, admit guilt to Colburn, is occurring on this set with all these mirrors. This is one of the stories where you could read it on the surface level and enjoy it, but you can also join me in my Delulu land of overanalyzing. So, for instance, in this moment where Meredith was the first to venture out into the stage, and I felt a ridiculous urge to grab her arm and pull her back, her identical twin appeared upside down, reflected on the floor. And to me, I think it shows that subtly that he is becoming like Richard. He is becoming possessive of her too. He already admitted in Act 1 that he's possessive of James, and we saw through the actions and words and skirting around, not saying but truly saying that Richard was possessive of his girls, as he said to James one time. So, like, he is possessive, he's reaching for Meredith, but also because Meredith is walking into the view of the mirrors, which mirrors represent truth. Meredith is walking into the truth, and he doesn't want that. And as we learned a few prologues ago, Meredith was the one that approached Colburn and told him to come for the arrest. Now, everyone one by one going out on the stage, but Oliver kind of refusing, hanging out in the wings, could on one note represent that he is refusing to acknowledge the truth, that he is willfully blinding himself to it, not acknowledging, say, James being the killer, or if you believe Oliver is the killer, that he doesn't want them to see the truth coming off him, as if walking into the mirror will expose them like Dorian Gray's painting. Now, he actually wonders if Ren was struggling as much as Oliver made it seem, because here she seems perfectly fine. He doesn't acknowledge her, still being sickly or still being off, or, a rare burst of her old self. Like, he doesn't acknowledge that, but he also rarely acknowledges Bren unless it's for a purpose to his story, which there was a purpose when she was having an Ophelia-like moment. But here it doesn't matter. He just needs her to, have someone voice, like, the stage is nice, what will it look like with the lights on, and have someone turn the lights on. So, like, he doesn't care for Red, definitely. But most characters he don't care about. He doesn't really go into their feelings or acknowledge them unless it is important to him in his story. He is very insensitive to people, and that's why, like, this review, and I never noticed it before, he doesn't care about others. He doesn't care about their feelings or what they're going through unless it affects him, and even then he focuses more on how their emotions is affecting him, if that makes sense. Now, they could have just said, look, it made stars, it made constellations, but no, they have Pip saying, look, there's Draco, a specific constellation. So there's a reason why she's going specific. So Draco means dragon in Latin, and there are two theories as to which of the stories the constellation is supposed to represent. One is that it represents the dragon that guarded the golden apples in Hera's garden, that was part of the 12 labors that Heracles had to go through. So this could represent then that the group has to face this dragon that they've been avoiding, kind of face the elephant in the room, confront what is happening. Or the other story that the constellation could be is the form that Zeus had taken when he escaped Cronus while he was eating his other kids. So it could represent that too, that they need to escape this, like, vortex, this black hole, before they are eaten. And to continue off that, if you haven't seen my other videos, I've talked about how Delacour is kind of a black hole vortex, that it is stripping away some of these characters' humanity and leaving these horrible traits, and it's just sucking them in. And there's a reason why Oliver gravitates back to Delacour. There's a reason why Pip hasn't left Delacour. I continuously bring up Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart in my literary analysis because I see a lot of parallels. For instance, there's the constant beating of the heart under the floorboards, and I think it's happening here where everyone's looking at it like they're stars. Like you can interpret that the others are in awe because it means that there's an infinite universe, that they're not trapped in this vortex of this university. And for some of them, they do leave it and move on with their lives. But for Oliver, he thinks that it ripples like the surface of the lake, and then he realizes that the stage reminds him of the lake in the middle of winter before freezing, the vast black sky reflected like a portal to another universe. I closed my eyes, feeling seasick. And as a reminder, the lake is where that's the scene of the crime, not only where Richard had died, but also that moment of the Macbeth where James nearly died. It's an important place, and we've revisited numerous times throughout the series. So I think, and it's the first place that I think like Oliver brings the, Colburn to. So I think here he doesn't see the infinite of the universe being infinite that he can escape. He sees this as like a black hole vortex, and this stage is that too for him. And to continue off that, if you haven't seen my other videos, I've talked about how Delacour is kind of a black hole vortex, that it is stripping away some of these characters' humanity and leaving these horrible traits, and it's just sucking them in. And there's a reason why Oliver gravitates back to Delacour. There's a reason why Pip hasn't left Delacour. I'm going to say this again. Pip is a strange enigma of a character. I don't know how to interpret her. I don't know how to typecast her, which, like, that's interesting because she doesn't quite have a typecast. She plays roles that are needed. She plays whether they are boy or girl roles. She plays them. And I'm saying that because here we see that Pip and Colin are constantly observing Alexander as he goes through withdrawal. They suffered with him, watching, worrying, not sleeping. And Pip is the one that supposedly had been the first to come across James and had taken the bloody weapon and supposedly his bloody clothes. Well, taken his bloody clothes, but I don't know why she wouldn't have taken his bloody weapon, which is the big, like, plot hole to me when it comes to why wouldn't she take the bloody weapon when she took his bloody clothes and allow him to walk away and be able to hide it in his mattress. That doesn't add up. But she is the first one there. She is the first one to hold Oliver back on stage during the Julius Caesar assassination. She is the one comforting the others. So a part of me wants to see, is she like the nursemaid to Juliet, who, like, I can't hold her down because I don't know how to interpret her, and I don't know what her role is, and I don't know what she's doing, and I don't think Oliver knows what her role is. She's just this enigma floating in and out of scenes, kind of like, again, going Edgar Allan Poe wrote, because I was watching Mike Flanagan Fall of the House of Usher kind of video essay where they talk about Red Death. In that story, she feels not quite like death, but she floats in and out of scenes, not quite there, but there, and playing an important role in every character's lives. Here's another example that Oliver generally doesn't care. If you say you love James, if you love him with the emotions that you claim you do, and you see him pulling away, retreating, and constantly walking, that literally in the middle of the night when he thinks that Oliver is sleeping, he puts on his coat and shoes and disappears. But Oliver never asked because he worries he wouldn't ask me to follow. Then follow him. If you truly, genuinely care, you would follow him. Pip would. So, like, to me, I think it proves that his emotions towards James is not genuine, which crushes me because the first 2 times I read this book, I love their romance. But this time, I really don't see it as much. I see Oliver in a more toxic, negative light. This entire scene felt very classic Gothic, with some of its elements of the characters finally, just hitting their breaking point, but also the dream sequence that Oliver kind of highlights a little bit towards the end of this scene, because dreams are often a component to Gothic stories, exposing and allowing these truly horrific kind of imagery to be put forth, representing characters' true feelings about things. And I really love the end of this scene because I think it really beautifully shows us the future of these characters, where Meredith, Alexander, and Ren are all kind of flitting around on the stage, doing their own things, which is how we know about their future. They're off doing their own things in their own performances. I don't really know much about Ren, but I'm assuming she is. Definitely Alexander and Meredith are off doing their own performances and like have their own careers. Pip is off on the rings, face tilted up towards Camillo, listening to something he's saying, which that is her future. James, though, faces the mirror, his hand to his mirrored reflection. Oliver comes up behind him, but not quite being within the frame of the mirror, being caught by the mirror. So, like, it's like Oliver's hunting James, watching him as James is confronting the truth, if we're to believe that, or facing himself and what he's been hiding from. So, on one note, again, you can interpret that James is about to come to terms with what he had done if James is the killer, or you can interpret that Oliver is watching him because Oliver is possessive and negative and toxic and the potential killer. I'm an idiot. I didn't go back to like re-listen to any of the clips I'd filmed. I had filmed like well into this like scene and didn't turn my microphone on. I have so many videos I have to delete and I have to do this all over again. So starting over, Act 2, Scene 5. Before I dig into it again, I want to talk about how strange it is that this is 13 pages, because we haven't had a very long scene since probably Act 2. I feel like Act 3 and Act 4 had a lot of shorter scenes where the longest they would go would be about 5 to 7 pages, but a lot of them were about 3 to 4 pages. And so all of a sudden we have 13 pages. So why all of a sudden this is long? I can't tell you off the top of my head, but it's catching my attention. But also the fact that we are flashing forward to past the opening night of King Lear, which is fascinating because while we didn't get like the minutia day to day, every single detail of the first half of the year, we got a lot more of the first half of the year. From September to December took up a lot more of this book, where we went into a lot more of what happened, the day to day, the characters' feelings and stuff. But when we got to the second half of the school year, we're not getting as much. We're flitting in and out, showing very little, which I think it could mean that like they're losing their grasp on reality, that they're falling out of it, that time is blurring, that they're disassociating. But it could also mean that Oliver is hiding from something from us. I don't know. As we get closer to the end, Oliver's subtlety is starting to wane. He's trying to become a little bit more transparent about actually telling us things. Case in point, when he describes one of the posters, he says, James, there's one of James, and underneath it says, trust not in the tameness of the wolf. So I think he's trying to subtly tell us, without outright telling us, without being as subtle as he had been in the past, that James is the suspect of this version of Oliver's tale. Now, I don't believe that this author does any detail without reason. There's a reason why. And so when she describes the color scheme of these posters being white and midnight blue, I believe there's a reason. So white typically represents innocence and purity. Now, I don't believe these students have ever been really innocent. Maybe in the very beginning of the first year, but even then, no. But it's mashed with midnight blue, which that shade is typically used for special occasions or royalty because it conveys power and authority and stuff like that. But it also can represent mystery, and according to psychology, blues convey this sense of trustworthiness and reliability. And actually, one of my professors had once said that when you go to court, you should wear your believable blues. So I wonder if there's a reason why we're doing this, because Julius Caesar posters were red and blue, the typical politicians, the divide of showing how they are picking sides, that they're, ostracizing one another. Whereas here we have this where I think this is the moment, this is the play also where truth and innocence is going to be coming out. I really like what Oliver says here, because I think it's him once again subtly telling us something that like represents the moment, and it's perfect for the moment, but also tells us so much about things afterwards. So in this case, when he says that, after the opening night, there's all the clapping, but the clapping didn't drown out the small sound of grief that had persisted from the final tragic scene. And I think it perfectly represents this, that at the end, things might be tied up nicely, but the emotions of the moments carry on. After Richard's death, grief continued on. After, say Oliver had given them an answer that he had done it, or even at the end of this saying that James had done it, the emotions of the grief this whole year carries on. You feel it without being told in the little descriptions we get about Pip, Meredith, and Alexander of how they are in the future, about James, supposedly what happened, that the grief continues on, which I think a big thing about this story is emotions, is what Oliver's trying to convey, because in Act 1, Gwendolyn said that you should not hide from emotions, you should feel it, you should embrace it, that you should overdo emotions, and the emotions is what led to this issue in the first place, but the emotions is also what is still haunting them. I really like Colin's character and what he represents, because I think he represents that despite everything, the world didn't stop when Richard died. You know, the students already do feel that like his presence is haunting them, that he hasn't quite left. But the other thing is that they're not special despite everything that had happened. Because the moment Richard was gone, Colin kind of filled his place, but we already were told that that could have happened. He was described as being called Richard II in Act 1. It was inevitable that Colin was going to fill that empty space. But here, Colin is the one setting up the after party, that despite how these group of students feel, despite the events, the after party was going to happen because it's a tradition. And even in the descriptions of Delacour in the present day, in the prologues, it is described as looking pretty much identical to how it had in like 10 years ago. So what it's showing is that while they are the main characters of the story, they are not the main characters of life. What they do might feel huge to them, but it doesn't stop the world or time for everyone else. Things continue on, and things don't change as drastically for everyone else as they had for this group of people. Am I overanalyzing this? Maybe, but really like when Oliver says that James changed more quickly than I or Alexander, hung his costume on the rack, and left the room without a word. And I think it's representing something, because despite what James has said in Act 1, that he gets caught up in his character, is showing here that he's readily getting rid of this character, removing himself from it and moving forward with its life, moving away from it, whereas Alexander and Oliver are dragging their feet and removing their costume to go to the party. They don't want to leave this world. As we see in the future, Alexander is still playing Shakespeare performances in New York City, and Oliver is still quoting Shakespeare. They haven't beaten that out of him quoting Colburn. He hasn't moved on, but James, we don't know. It doesn't seem like he's still doing Shakespeare. It seems like he's moved on in his life. So part of me wonders if whether James had grown past that fear, that he had, gotten past getting caught up in the characters, or did Oliver put those words in his mouth? Again, this author does not do anything just because. While it's a lovely description, there's a reason that she's describing how, unlike our last party, there was no lights outside, only a dim yellowish glow seeping out from the kitchen. So the castle's not welcoming. It's not a party. It is almost a tomb. Upstairs, a candle guttered in one of the library windows, a single window with a light, and the light actually is in a room where knowledge could be acquired. It is lighting you to it, but I like that it feels not as warm, as welcoming, and it feels more prison-like. It feels more like a Gothic house. It feels more like Wuthering Heights, and how that home is described in the beginning of the book, how it is decrepit and creepy and dark, but with a single light in the window lured Kathy's ghost to bang at the window. That is what this feels like here. This description of Meredith is fascinating because every moment leading up, she has been so polished. Despite everything, she's been so polished. But yet here she is curled up, hugging herself, making herself so small, sitting outside alone. Someone who supposedly desires and needs constant attention is sitting alone, making herself small, and her makeup is imperfect, it's smudged and smeared. So what made her finally crack? What was that breaking point? And the sad thing is that we don't know. But the other interesting thing is that this is supposedly the party that she had gone to Colburn's store, knocked on it, and led to him creating their arrest, according to Colburn in the prologue of Act 4. But however, Oliver describes her wearing a black dress, and Colburn described her as wearing a glittery dress, like she was lit up like a Christmas tree. So something is not right here. I don't know what's happening. I don't know if he just mixed up his details and didn't catch that small detail from Colburn, which then is showing that he is lying to us because he costumed Meredith in an outfit that he thinks is more fitting for her in his tale that he is trying to describe, because he describes the black. It's not quite like party, but more like she's going to a wake. So like, so much to unpack there. But if all being said, we don't know what she said to Colburn. Colburn does not tell us, and I wish he would, because that would tell us a lot. But what led her to this moment to go to Colburn? And God. But I wonder if this moment actually happened, because I think it's trying to show that she was not afraid of all of Oliver. Yes, I was trying to think of the names. Oliver, because she wasn't hiding from him, but actually wanted to tell him something, and then decided, I'll tell you tomorrow. So I wonder if this actually happened, because there are a few moments where she looks at him warily. So I wonder if he's trying to push the, not blame, but suspicion away from him. I don't know. So like, maybe she wasn't afraid of him. Maybe she did think it was James, but I don't know. Oh, Oliver, you're showing yourself so well here, because he says, you know, when her gone disappeared inside, the wheels and cogs of my brain began to turn slowly at first. What does she want to tell me that was so tremendous that it drawn tears from her? A woman made of marble. A woman made of marble is how he sees her, despite numerous times that she has outright said and practically screamed at them that she's more than her typecasting, that she has feelings. She has told them that, like, she is sad. She has shown her feelings and emotions and told us, the readers. She may not have screamed and cried and wept and fainted like Ren, but she still had told them that she had them. But yet to Oliver, he has never acknowledged them. He has always seen her as just a woman of marble. She is a statue to admire and possess and nothing more. Here we get this moment where he is trying to push the suspicion onto Meredith, but Meredith I've always been suspicious of. She is definitely within my top 3. I fluctuate between who's my top person every read through, and even as I'm reading, and it's between Oliver, James, and Meredith, because I think that they all have the best cases against them. But here Oliver is saying it outright that but I had never considered the possibility that Meredith might be guilty of something just as bad, or something worse. The past 6 months splintered into sharp little fragments of memory, the firelight flashing on Meredith's teeth as she laughed, sand and water and wet sheet clinging to her body on the beach, her falling on the stage, blood creeping down on her out of her sleeve, arms rigid at her side as she shouted at Richard in the kitchen, her fingers clenched in his fingers clenched in her hair, a scrap of bloody fabric in the fireplace. Could she have done it? Left me sleeping in her room, crept out of the castle and down to the dock and killed him, then stripped her clothes off and crawled back into bed with me? I felt lightheaded just thinking about it. So there's a high possibility, but what this is saying, the description, for instance, sand and water and a wet sheet cling to her body, doesn't quite add up with then her changing her clothes, as he says later in this paragraph, but it also doesn't add up with how he had described her during the actual scene when they had gone to Richard to be all stand alongside the lake. So he's lying in one of these cases. So I don't know which one is the truth, and that is the brilliance and the annoyance of the story. Earlier in the scene, it was described that the castle had barely any lights, but there was a single candle lit in the library window, the place where there's knowledge, and the single person in that room is James. So I think that is Oliver kind of subtly telling us in Colburn that he has been pursuing the wrong person to get the knowledge from, that the person that actually knows the truth of this case might actually have been James. Because in the prologue of Act 5, Oliver describes how their bedroom in the tower overlooks the lake, and then here James is saying to him, did you know if you look out here you can see the what's it called, not dock, but the boathouse perfectly. So what is he subtly telling us? That maybe James had actually seen the crime. What if he had been in this room or in his own room and had actually seen who had committed this crime, whether it was Oliver or Meredith? And what if the guilt of it in the moment is what's been spiraling him, that he has been maybe seen the crime and decided in that moment not to go out and stop it because he thought maybe Meredith was justified, or loved Oliver enough that he didn't want to stop him. However, when he was confronted with Richard still being alive, he did, urge forward to go save Richard, but everyone stopped him. And then since then, he has felt the guilt of this. He knows who has done it, and he has been spiraling under that weight of guilt. So it's equally possible, again, that James could have committed this crime, but I'm starting to wonder if everything that is going on with James in the second half and in his future is because he knows who has committed this crime. What if it is James that is mad at Oliver for taking the blame for saying Meredith? What if, how Meredith was supposedly mad at Oliver for taking the blame for James? What if it's the reverse? What if that is what is happening, and that's why James has kept going to him being like, tell the truth. Maybe it's not tell the truth that I had done it. What if it's tell the truth that Meredith had done it? What if it's that because Oliver is trying to lean into his hero complex to save the fair maiden kind of egotisticalness of himself? Who knows? But I'm starting to wonder now, all of a sudden, that what if James really does know what happens in that case, but he's been protecting Oliver, who's protecting someone else, or protecting Oliver, who had committed this crime? I don't know. but I'm fascinated by this detail that I just caught here. And I could be completely wrong. It could be nothing. Who knows? Oliver's lying to us. We have another moment of mirroring because during the last after, opening night party, Richard had confined himself upstairs. We don't know exactly where, but upstairs, drinking a bottle of whiskey by himself. We're seeing it again here with James. He confined himself to the library upstairs and drank a bottle of vodka by himself. So what is he trying to tell us by having another mirroring moment? I think he's trying to make us think that he's like Richard, but there are only certain moments. Maybe he is, because he was violent with James a couple times, but it's equally possible that both James and Oliver have aspects of them that are Richard-like. Then James starts quoting King Lear, saying, things like this cold night would turn us all to fools and madmen. So why King Lear? Why tell us this in this moment? I think it's Oliver trying to show us that he hasn't disconnected from his character, that he's lost in his character, and that's why he's still wearing the makeup from his stage makeup. So it's falling back on his fear from Act 1. And as I said earlier in this scene, I'm not entirely sure if that is true. We don't know if he's telling the truth in this moment, or if Oliver had put the words in his mouth, or if really Oliver did struggle with disconnecting, and now we're seeing him falling deeper into his character, leading to eventually Oliver admitting guilt for him. But why spiral him to this moment to then end at the precipice with Oliver taking the blame? Why do that? Why not have him spiraling prior, right before Richard's death? If he was responsible for Richard's death, why spiral like this now? James continues to quote King Lear, I believe, but he's quoting Shakespeare either way, and he says, Thou have me whipped for speaking true, thou have me whipping for lying, and sometimes I am whipped for holding my peace. And it felt reminiscent to the quote Oliver had said to Colburn in Act V's prologue, with a similar quote of, wherein I am false, I am honest, not true to be true. Whip me for speaking true, whip me for lying. Sometimes I'm whipped for holding my peace. And I think it's one subtly telling us that where, their words can be true, yet simultaneously false, that they're layered and they're complex. And he is hiding the truth amongst falsehood, but also lying to us where he's trying to say the truth. But simultaneously, it's making me think that Oliver and James are all the same person, that they're not separate entities anymore. That Oliver has created James's character and implanted himself and his fears and thoughts and beliefs onto James. I'm believing that more and more with this read through. Again, I could be completely wrong, but that's the brilliance of this story. Even though James is quoting King Lear, the scene itself, the rambling, the jumping, the madness of it is more reminiscent to Hamlet, which he has earlier been associated with and described to be like, even though Oliver for one brief moment associated himself with Hamlet, it is more so James, the way that he's painting James. It's Hamlet-like. He's in the midst of his madness, per se. And again, Hamlet is a tragedy, so it fits within this story type that Oliver is painting. While James is mirroring Richard with the two of them during the after parties off by themselves drinking, there is a difference still. Richard turns violent when we do interact with him after emerging from his lair where he had drank. James, though, is not violent. He's in the midst of madness, but not violent still. The other difference is that no one had gone to Richard. Richard had come out looking for others. James was still there, and Oliver had come looking for him. Someone cares about him. But also, I think it's showing that there is a slight difference to James. James is not Richard. While there are similarities, there's a mirroring here. At the core of it, James is not Richard. While, yes, there was a brief moment of him being violent, there was no anger and tension. He does not continue it. Not in the way that Richard had. So to me, in my biased self, because I am biased, because I like James, I don't strongly believe that he is capable of this crime. Of course, I continue to keep him in my list of suspects, because I think he could be capable of this crime, but a part of me never really truly believes it. I believe more strongly towards Oliver and Meredith, to be perfectly honest. Though I do have a friend who would disagree with me. I don't know if she believes that he is the killer, but she definitely does not like James as a person. What's interesting is that Oliver doesn't continue to follow James after he emerges from the room, leaving the rest of the group to deal with him. And he mentions that James was never really much of a drinker, and then takes a swallow from the vodka bottle. It burns the watery saliva, puts his mouth to it, and it's a slightly romantic kind of notion if you think about it, like, both their mouths were on this, but like things like that, but also that I think there's symbolism in the sense of, or revealing of Oliver's character, because even though he claims to care about James and did go up to see after him, when James runs away, he doesn't chase after him. Not really. So at the end of the day, while he is possessive of James, he will let him run, if that makes sense. He doesn't care that much, if that makes sense. And to continue off that, he only goes after James after Pip comes in the room, and he feels like that's probably what he is supposed to do, what is expected of him. But I don't know if Pip had never come, I don't know if Oliver would have gone after James. Fucking Oliver being cryptic, because he says to Pip, handing her the bottle of vodka, it's definitely too late for James, and it might be too late for Meredith, but keep running Alexander sober if you can. And he's talking about like they're drunk. Meredith wasn't drunk. There was no sense of her being drunk. She was just emotional, revealing her true emotions for once. But like, those are also my lead suspects. But like, still, what is he trying to say? When, in all honesty, Ren and Alexander have already jumped off that cliff into madness. They've already fell into their guilt. So like, why look out for them? Like, there's little things like that which could mean literally nothing, could mean what it is saying on the surface level, but I feel like he's saying more. But I think it's just my delusional self hoping and wishing that he was saying more to give us an answer finally. Again, this entire night could be false. Everything could be false as far as we know with Oliver, but I like the mirroring of the last opening night's party, not only with the strangeness of everyone, with the drinking alone with Richard, but now with James, but Oliver coming across James in the bathroom once again. But this time, James had punched the mirror, the thing that is supposed to reflect the truth. So what is he hiding? What is he afraid to confront? Is what Oliver is obviously trying to make us think about. So is it true? Because Oliver is telling us this. It's a very obvious symbolism in this moment. So is it true? I also love Oliver trying to be sly and try to subtly infer that James is doing this out of jealousy, with the acknowledging of the open mascara bottle and saying it's Meredith's. He doesn't point it out, doesn't say it like outright to us, but he's not as subtle as you think he is, which I think the reason why it's not so subtle stands out, and there's a point which to me is saying he's lying. He is trying to point us towards a red herring. Can you tell how cynical I am of everything that comes out of Oliver's mouth? Let me tell you, the first time I heard this story, I listened to it as an audiobook, believed 95% of what came out of this guy's mouth. I believed him. I loved the story. Every time I've read it since, I've believed less and less of what he says up to this point now, where obviously everything that comes out of his mouth, I question and doubt and think he's a liar. I also love that in the course of this scene, with both leads, two out of the three lead suspects of this crime, they obviously are holding something in and refuse to tell Oliver. But the fascinating thing is that Oliver doesn't ask Meredith exactly what's going on. He just says, if something's happening, I can help, kind of saying like, I want to help, but like, does he really? I'm cynical of Oliver, obviously, this read through, but she pushes him, she suggests it by saying, can I tell you something? But then saying, never mind, I'll tell you tomorrow. Whereas here, Oliver is saying like, I just want to help, let me help. Okay, exactly what he said to Meredith, tell me what's going on. And all James says is no. But while Oliver didn't push Meredith, he just accepted her answer. He pushes James and says, come on, you can tell me, even if it's bad, even if it's really bad, we can fix it. And James yells no. So it's fascinating that with these two characters, he's doing exactly the same thing within the same scene, but responds to them differently at the same time. Every now and then in this book, Oliver says something that makes me very suspicious of him more than I already am, but he says that in this moment, he seemed so small all of a sudden, how easy it should have been for me to overpower him. And he said this in a couple other moments. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. I feel like it was in description of Meredith, but like in others. And I think that is trying to tell us something. How easily it should have been for me to overpower him. I think it's giving credit that he could have overpowered Richard in that moment, drunk in the way that he was. Oliver tries to discredit himself, saying that he's weaker, but he did mention that he bulked up a little bit over the summer. he's not as weak as he is trying to say outwardly, because I think he is capable of this crime, is what he is subtly telling us here. Maybe. For a while now, the last handful of pages, we've had numerous moments, more so like when they got back in January, that James has been going off on his own wandering, and he hasn't outright said to Oliver, "Don't follow me." Oliver has mentioned that he's never asked because he's afraid of getting a rejection. But in this moment, finally, James says, "Don't follow me, Oliver." And I think it's going to be reflected again in the future that James really didn't want Oliver to follow him. But Oliver, being possessive and obsessed that he is, doesn't listen and does follow eventually. It just takes him a while before deciding that he will do it. He doesn't do it right away. But we see continuously that he doesn't immediately follow after James, afraid of being rejected and stuff like that, but eventually he does. So you can interpret it as romantic, but you can interpret it as obsessive and possessive. And then it brings up the question of, is possession really love? Because that is a question, for instance, argued in The Haunting of Bly Manor, for instance. Again, I recently watched a video essay about that, but it's, I think, something that we see throughout here, that is possession really love? I didn't catch this any other time, but I caught it this time, and it's another moment of mirroring of that same last after party night. Just as the last after party, Meredith and Oliver had gone up to the room, supposedly, if you're to believe it, leading to Richard to act the way he did. In this moment, James asks Ren to come to his room and looks, meets Oliver in the eyes, supposedly, and Oliver goes to follow, but Alexandra stops him and says, "Oliver, no, not this time." Because it's a mirroring of the last time. I think they're afraid of, if Oliver follows and blows up, will he blow up like Richard? Will we have a repeat of the last time? What will happen? Because this is all repeating. But the fascinating thing is that despite things repeating, the aftermath and the decisions and their actions are slightly different. So they have changed, but they also judge each other differently than they judge Richard, which is equally fascinating. And it's playing God. It's the Sparrow quote of who, fate versus agency, and who has agency and who has the right to play God in this instance. And it's, I think, them claiming agency a little bit here. I don't know, I'm rambling a little bit, but it's fascinating that there's this complete mirroring of this scene with that other after party, but the way that the tone is so different and their decisions are so different, that all the emotion from that last after party has completely drained, and they're struggling just to get through this, that they have no emotions. And I think it's the emotions, like I said earlier, that played a role that led to the events of that night, but is now the lack of it is leading to why it's not building up tonight, even though the actions are kind of identical. And finally, this scene ends with Oliver saying to notice at first that Meredith was missing, which is to infer Colburn's comment back in the prologue of Act 4 that Meredith had come knocking on his door after the after party, and that's what led to the arrest. Oliver tried claiming that he did notice her missing, so I think he's putting it in here, but obviously I don't think he did, because he described Meredith wearing a black dress in the scene, and Colburn described her wearing a sparkly one. So either he's not really listening to Colburn, or maybe she did change, or I don't know. It's interesting, this detail, and I really, really, really wish we knew what she said to Colburn. Meredith going to Colburn is a beautiful example of showing us that Oliver is lying. This is the most obvious example that Oliver is lying to us in some form. We don't know how much he's lying to us, but there's at least some lying. Whereas before you can assume, guess, but never concretely, but here, towards the end in Act 5, Scene 3, it seems more obvious, because in Act 4's prologue, that is where Colburn said that Meredith had come to his door late one night dressed like a Christmas tree, and that is what led to him making the arrest. Now, Oliver described her at this party. This is the very same party, because Meredith had said to Colburn, I can't stay long, someone's gonna know I'm missing from this party I snuck out. Oliver said, I noticed that she was missing, but when we get to the actual scene, he describes her wearing all black. not decked out like a Christmas tree, all glittery. He also says in this scene in the beginning that he had been wandering around, not sure where Meredith is. By the time the party had died and everyone was going to bed, she still hadn't come back. So if Meredith was so concerned of not being noticed that she was missing, this isn't adding up then, if that makes sense. Like, not just the outfit, but the fact that she's still not back at the house, which it could be logical. Maybe she had decided afterwards that she didn't want to go back after talking to Colburn, a little afraid for her life, or he kept her longer than she thought he would. Colburn doesn't tell us anything. That's the other thing. We don't know anything on Colburn's side. We don't know what she told him. But this stands out more blatantly that Oliver had already decided before walking into this, not quite interview, but performance with Colburn, what he was going to say. And so, even though Colburn provided this new detail, he didn't deviate from his story, if that makes sense, because he's already written it and edited it and practiced it for the last 10 years. But I think Oliver is trying to justify why he was with Pip, or why he's still with Pip. Like, I don't know why he went to Pip in this moment, because if anything, he could still go to Meredith's bed. Like, he should have been able to assume that if Meredith arrived late, that she would be fine with him in her bed, and if she didn't, she would wake him up and kick him out. But like, he could have slept there. So why was he wandering aimlessly like he's a lost puppy with no home, since James is apparently hooking up with Ren in their room, and then goes to Pip? And what does it mean that he goes to Pip? Because there's something, again, Pip is an enigma. I don't know how to pin her down. There's a reason why she is still part of his story, why she picked him up. Like, there's something there, and I don't know about her, and I wish someone else would tell me more about Pip, because I literally cannot even formulate an idea of how to interpret Pip. What I'm about to say is only because I am reading this so closely and so critically and playing devil's advocate. Now, Oliver is cleaning, and he doesn't point out when he's cleaning unless there's something drastic that happens, which on one note makes sense for a book. You don't want the minutiae, the little details of him constantly cleaning, but I wouldn't mind a few more references to him cleaning, just being like, oh, I would clean before I went to rehearsal, something like that. But at the same time, like I said, the second half of the year, we are flying by. We're not going into smaller details as we had in the first half of the year. But I'm saying that because isn't it just convenient that he happens to be cleaning because he needs to do something to not think about what happened the night before, because what really happened the night before, it's something big, I guess, in relationship stance, but not that big. But then he just happens to discover the murder weapon the next day. Like, sorry. And to continue off that, it just happens to occur, a day or two prior to Colburn coming to arrest them. Like, interesting. It could actually have happened that way. It's just the chances of it happening that way is kind of slim. Though I do love that he is using this excuse not only to not think about what happened, but to purge the castle, cleanse it, baptize it. That is all of a sudden a dirty thing. That it went from a haven for them in the beginning to a prison to now something that needed to be cleansed. That he didn't even, I feel like, feel that way after Richard's death or all that was going up. He still idolized and loved the place, but now it needs to be cleansed, and he needs to be the one that cleanses it, almost. Now it's the tiny details I'm going to hyperfixate on, like Oliver cleaning up Meredith's mascara. Now, why was the mascara in the bathroom in the first place? Because I imagine Meredith being the type of girl to do her makeup in her room or keep it at least there. And like, if she was going to do her makeup that night, it would have been at the theater for the performance. I don't know if she would have taken it off, but even if she did, like, I don't imagine her mascara being there. So why was her mascara there? But so I wonder if he was inferring that her whole crying scene that happened at the party was a performance because her mascara was running down her face. So unless she cleaned herself up to go see Colburn, but still leaving her mascara there is what's fascinating out of everything. I don't know. With Meredith, we don't know much about her makeup because Oliver is our narrator, but the fact that he pockets it stands out to me, and I wonder if it's important later. Like, I can't remember, but I'm like fixating on that detail. I understand that Oliver's in a weird mental state that I will not understand personally. That like he's in this weird cleansing of the house kind of thing, but still, a normal custodial staff is not going to go into the individual rooms. Like in my college, they clean just the common areas, not your individual rooms. So Oliver's poking in all these rooms is interesting to me, because following that, he goes into Richard's room and then is peeking under his bed, and he's going to peek under James's bed, which is very personal. And like, I tried to look up the symbolism of that, and I got a lot more of like looking for monsters and ghosts and paranormal and stuff like that. But like, I think it's our metaphorical monsters are hidden under a bed. That is our hiding space. Even when you're a kid, you hide things from your parents and your siblings under your bed. And here is Oliver peeking, looking for their secrets, for the things that they're trying to hide away. And he tries to write it off like, oh, I was just looking for this missing chess piece, or oh, I just happened to notice this fluff when I was making his bed. But like, he's poking underneath like the hood, kind of going into the dark corners and the places that they don't want Oliver to be, and he's, impeding on. What Oliver says in Richard's room is fascinating to me, because he says an old forgotten affection stirred, and I looked away, searching for something to remind me why I'd be a fool to regret for 1 minute that he was gone. And in the beginning of the book, the way that he described him is like, yeah, he was a tough person to like, but we liked him because we were a found family. And like with most families, not all families, but most, even when you hate them, you love them. You would go to hell for them, even though you were really annoyed that you had to go to hell for them. But you get this sense with this found family that they feel like that, but it's much watered down. And as the book has progressed, it's watered down to a point where like they barely contact each other. The only ones still trying is Pip and Oliver. But they still liked Richard in the beginning. And in this moment, it's him trying to force that he doesn't want to like Richard, even though he used to. There was a really cute moment between the two of them of him complimenting Oliver going to the first edition in the beginning of the book. So like, I think he's like trying to deal with the guilt of justifying letting him die. So whenever I imagine the mattress thing, I thought it was like underneath, but apparently I think they're trying to say that it was at the foot of the bed, like that part of the mattress that he found the hole. But because I was wondering how he would have noticed the red mark of the blood if it was underneath, wouldn't it be dark and hard to see? But the whole thing is interesting to me and doesn't make sense, because why would you put the murder weapon, the hook, into your mattress? You could have put it in the lake. They weren't trudging the lake, so there's no reason to worry about that if you've thrown it in the lake. But no, it's in his mattress, and he's been sleeping on it for months. Like Telltale Heart, Edgar Allan Poe energy. Like, that doesn't make sense. And like, if we're to believe the version that James had given Oliver, Pip took his bloody clothes but didn't take the bloody weapon. So why is it there? Why there? It would make more sense that, say, Oliver had done it originally and originally put it in that locker beneath the feeder where he's been hiding things anyway. But why so close, especially when the police had spent a week minimum searching the castle? Of course they would have looked under the beds and things like that. So why? So I have a video, I'll probably attach it down below, that I made like a year ago, talking about how I wondered if Meredith had planted it on him and then gone to the police out of jealousy, trying to form that narrative. But like, I don't know. It's so strange that it's there and he's been sleeping on it. It's a hook. As Oliver's running across campus with the boat hook, let's talk about it for a little bit, because in my mind, I imagined it being that short, kind of rounded hook of a metal, kind of like, when you're like Captain Hook, imagine what he uses for his hands. But that's not the case. I googled just to double check and see if there's any symbolism to it. But like, a boat hook is like a long spear like object that has a slightly dulled tip that is a little bit hooked, so you can push and pull your boat into place at the dock, or get out of the dock. And it stands out even more to me because I'm like, how does it fit in the bed? Because he doesn't describe it broken off. He just describes it as the talon and the pole had been hastily wiped clean, but blood still clung through the crevices, cracked and flaking away like rust. The old boat hook curved at one end like a claw snatched from the long-forgotten rack of tools at the back of the boathouse. He doesn't say it's broken in half. This is a long object. But also, how is it used to bludgeon someone? Because it's spear-like. It's narrow. It's not a baseball bat. It's not a hammer. Why was that the first weapon you would go to? Like, the way I imagine the boat hook, the hook like Captain Hook's, feels like it would be a solid metal piece that would do more damage than this actual boat hook. So if I had a boat hook, because it's spear-like, I would more so stab someone, I feel like, with that. Like, that would be the instinct. But yet, Richard didn't have puncture wounds. He was beaten. And so like things aren't adding up. So I wonder, I don't remember. I guess I'll see if Colburn says that there was blood tied to the murder weapon, but I'm wondering if this isn't the murder weapon, that this object that Oliver had maybe presented to Colburn at the time that he confessed is not the murder weapon, and that's why Colburn has been questioning this for the last decade, because that's not the murder weapon, obviously. And also, to Colburn, Oliver seems like he doesn't have motive. To Colburn, Meredith and James seem more likely to have motive. An ex-girlfriend who was in an abusive relationship, but then a guy that had obvious, was beaten and harassed, and with witnesses, case in point, the Macbeth performance. So, like, those two seem like they're more likely than Oliver, but as I said in this read through, I'm more critical, and I think Oliver did it. But again, you can read this story numerous times, and every time pick any of these people and find evidence to show that maybe they had done it, but then find plot holes that make you question, did they do it? So that's the annoyance and the brilliance of the story. The other interesting thing is how he continues to protect James despite his feelings and emotion towards James leading up to now. Like, I feel like after Christmas break, everything with them has been distant. So I'm surprised that he is immediately running to hide this. He doesn't waver, doesn't question. He just runs and hides this in the same hiding spot, which I don't know. In that moment, I would probably shove it back in, because it's not like the police are coming to look for them right now. There's no reason to go hide this in a different place. If it was in a good enough hiding spot that they hadn't noticed in the prior searches, and they had searched for over a week, which this is the other detail that I am going to continuously complain about. Like, how would they have not noticed? Like, I guarantee they would have looked under beds and things like that when they were searching the castle for over a week. So yeah, this is one of the things I'm like, Oliver, I think you're lying to us. And by that, I mean, I think either Oliver has always had that, like the boat hook and the cloth hidden in the locker leading up to now, or had moved it there prior, or just grabbed that, like he said, grabbed something random off the rack when he went to go, confess to Colburn. Something like that. I don't know. So if we were to follow down my line of theorizing where Oliver had done it, he, had committed this crime, hidden the weapons, all those things, why then confess to the crime when Colburn comes? Had Colburn always come for him, or was Colburn coming for James? We never know who he was coming for that night at that performance, waiting in the wings. And if he was, say, coming for James and Oliver stepped forward to confess, why? Why do this? Unless, like, maybe he feels like Colburn had been coming for him anyway, and he was just like, I'll just get ahead of it, and the guilt's eating me anyway, or I want to spin this narrative the way I want it, so I'd rather step forward, not realizing that maybe he had come for James. Like, I don't know, and this is where it gets tricky, because, even if Oliver hadn't done it, why step forward? Like, I think it's part of his hero complex. I do think it's part of his hero complex. I wonder if he thought it was for Meredith, too. But, like, Easy was literally just the last scene, or the previous scene, questioning if Meredith had done it and wondering if she was the killer. So, like, I wonder if he was doing it to protect Meredith in the moment, not realizing maybe it was James. But either way, I think it's part of his hero complex where he is stepping forward and trying to protect people, but not really protect people. I think he's so superficial with things, but yeah, I don't know. So the fascinating thing about the later part of this book is the lack of Shakespeare quotes. The fellow students don't use them very often. The only one that so far that really has been James. And that was when he seemed to be in the midst of his fit of madness. And then again here with Oliver, he quotes Shakespeare saying, um, where's the line? I am sick with working up of my thoughts. And Alexander goes, Oliver, what? Like, none of them have been quoting Shakespeare since, in the spring semester. So part of me wonders if they had always been quoting Shakespeare, if it was only an Oliver thing, Oliver and James thing. But also, I think it's showing that the rest of them are already leaving this behind. They're already moving on. The only ones that aren't moving on is James and Oliver, who are still so engrossed and deep in Shakespeare that they've kind of are starting to lose their way in this maze. If you were to summarize this entirety book with a Shakespeare quote, it would be this one that James performs during his King Lear performance. And on page 325, he says, "As if we were villains on necessity, fools by heavenly compulsion, knaves, thieves, and treacherous by satirical dominance, drunkards, liars, and adulterers by an enforced obedience of planetary influence, and all that we are evil in by divine thrust on." That pretty much summarizes a lot of this book, or at least the base level of this book, of Oliver's performance here to us and to Colburn. Also, I just noticed the weird thing about this performance. In every other performance, and every other time they quote Shakespeare, it is formatted as if you're reading Shakespeare in the typical iambic pentameter, section off, but not here. It is written as though just a quote in the book. It is not written as if a play, which is weird. Remember back in Act 1 when Gwendolyn said you need to feel the emotions, embrace them, really, feel them through your body. You shouldn't do a half-ass. You should really feel the emotion, exude emotions. And right now I think Oliver's feeling it. And there's again the blurring of the line of reality and fiction, which Gwendolyn helps kind of blur further during her lessons and her teaching over the last couple of years. Because here, Oliver's emotions right here, he's saying that, James is performing his lines with cold mask, whereas he's oblivious to the disbelief and the fright and the fear that ripped me in half every time I looked at him. And that fits the character that he is performing right now in this moment, in this scene. So, the emotions he is feeling in his real life matches the feelings that his character would feel. So where does one start and one end kind of thing is happening yet again. And it's because of this blurring of the line that led to Richard's death in the first place. Whether you think it was because of Richard blurring the line, or you think it's because of James or Oliver or Meredith blurring the line, depending on who you think committed the crime. And it's with James's parting lines that make me question again the validity of the story that Oliver is telling. James says, also in iambic pentameter formatting, again, not like how it was in the previous page, where it was written as though just a normal dialogue, normal lines within a paragraph. Here it's formatted more like the play. But he says, "A brother noble, whose nature it is so far from doing harm, that he suspects none, on whose foolish honesty my practice ride easy." A brother noble. Oliver has always had others call him noble throughout this book. Others think he's noble, he's kind, he's the good guy. He thinks himself a little bit of that too. And here's James quoting that for his character, and then says, "Whose nature is so far from doing harm." That is how Oliver has presented himself, how presented others thinking of him throughout this telling, that others think he would be so far from doing harm, that he's such a good guy, that when he does act in anger, they're a little surprised in those very rare fleeting moments we've gotten to see throughout this book, that he suspects none on whose foolish honesty. It's him, Oliver, having James point that he had done it in a performance using Shakespeare to say it without saying, but in the normal way that Oliver has been doing throughout this entire this play. So a part of me wonders, because it fits so perfectly, this quote, within the way that Oliver is telling this tale, again, is how truthful is it? What is the validity of this? The brilliance of this book is that you can read lines and just read them as they are and breeze past them, meaning very little to you, or you can hyperfixate on them as I am this time through, and every time you're hyperfixate on a different line, for instance. And right now in Act 5, Scene 5, Oliver says that he puts a jacket over my bare chest. "My madman's rags made me feel naked and vulnerable." And it's fascinating and caught my attention to me because I'm like, he's the madman and he feels like he needs to hide that. And that's what he's been doing all this time. He's hiding his kind of madness. I think he's fully aware of his madness, of what has happened, whether he has committed this crime or not. He is on the slight unhinged. There's at least once he has referenced himself to being like Hamlet, who is considered the Mad Prince. But he's clothing it because it makes him feel naked and vulnerable, because when you strip him down to his madness, that is his most naked, vulnerable self. That is what led him to this possible outcome, whether he did commit the crime or not. But him clothing it is what he's been doing all this time. He's donning this typecast, this idea, this persona, this character that he has been playing, performing for all of us this entirety of the book, both us and Colburn, whether it is happening in the moment or he is writing this all down years after interacting with Colburn, or maybe he never did interact with Colburn and he's fictionalizing that too. We don't know, but he is putting clothes over all this, trying to hide it, but it's like when you put a jacket over a costume, you still see the costume peeking out underneath. You still see the Mad Men rags peeking out if you know to look, or you see little hints and glimmers of it that catches your eye for a moment, but then you move past it even if you don't know to look for it, if that makes sense. Meredith's costume for this performance fascinates me because Oliver describes it as her looking like a Grecian princess, which one is fascinating because the majority of the time she's playing seductress or queens, not usually princesses. Princesses usually go to Ren. And she's wearing this pale blue, which is this soft, believable, trustworthy color, very feminine kind of color compared to usually her bolder blacks and reds and those such. But like her hair is softly curled going down her back, and Oliver goes to her and kisses her, and she asks what that was for, and he knows something more than he's letting on. I feel like even if he was confronting James, why is he acting like he's going to prison already? But I might be overthinking that, but still, she says, what was that for? He says, you scared the hell out of me. But he also says that like he didn't need to tell her she was beautiful. She already knew, but like that was a little mean of him. But like he's clutching the fabric of her dress as he says, you scared the hell out of me. And I wonder if he wonders if she did do it, if he's still doubting if James had actually done it. I think that's a hint maybe to us, the viewers or readers, to Colburn, that he might be lying about James. I could have still been Meredith, who knows? But he's clutching at the fabric of her dress, which is her costume. It's like he's clutching at that typecasting, that character that she's performing. And that's the thing that like I heard somewhere else in a video essay about something else where your typecasting changes as you get older. You don't stay the same. No one stays the same. And I think that's a part of the story. It's the hyperfixation on your typecasting. That is like one of the very first things that we're told about is everyone's typecasting when Oliver introduces each of the characters. And you're seeing towards the end that these characters aren't fitting within those original typecasting anymore because they grow and change. While they might have been afraid that they'd be stuck in it, you don't. But yet Oliver is still clinging to it. He wants to cling to everyone's original typecasting. He wants these because it makes sense. It puts sense and order in this chaotic world for him. And yeah, I'm rambling, but like just that little detail can set me off, obviously. But I don't know how to unpack it fully, but it caught my eye. Definitely in this detail about Meredith's costume and this interaction between the two of them here. Am I overthinking things? Absolutely. Am I hyperfixating on the most mundane? Absolutely. But that's what I'm doing this read through. And so when Meredith is running her finger over Oliver's Oliver's collarbone and says, I'll tell you later tonight, it caught my eye. Now, at first, maybe I might have been like, oh, that's slight romantic, her touching him. And she has this need to be admired and to be touched. That's her love language. But at the same time, it caught my attention because I think there's more to it. Because let's flash back to Richard's staff and how it was described, his neck bent in a strange angle. Even Alexander during his overdose, his neck at a strange angle. And when you, in all these Shakespearean plays, when someone has committed a crime and sentenced to death, they're either hung or, head beheaded. And usually it's like the collarbone above that is what's left. And she's poking at that. And as we see the rest of this performance, she's mad at Oliver for taking James's spot, whether she actually thought it was James or not, but she is, I think, either way, playing God in this moment. And I think that the brilliance of Meredith is that you see her and you question and you wonder if she is behind more than she is, but at the same time you dismiss her for the men. So I wonder if Meredith is manipulating and moving pieces and is playing more of a Lady Macbeth than we had ever thought, because she is more cunning than we would ever assume or ever thought. And I think Oliver would have ever thought, and that's why he hasn't really put too much behind her besides one scene he wonders aloud to us, could she have done this? And I think she could have. It's very equally possible. That's why I fluctuate between Oliver, Meredith, and James, because all three of them I could honestly believe could have done it. It is this moment that has fueled a lot of my suspicion and theories regarding Meredith, James, and Oliver. When James says the other day in class, "Don't kiss James like you did that again," and she stares at him hard and incomprehensible for a moment, then her expression hardened as she asks, "Who is it you're jealous of? Him or me?" And part of me wonders if him and Meredith ever really had a thing. Part of me wonders if him and James ever really had a thing, or if he's fictionalizing it completely. A part of me wonders if Meredith was jealous and had set James up, had planted the evidence on him in hopes that he would be arrested, leaving Oliver to then be her Richard replacement, to worship her fully as she expected. I don't know, but in this moment, I think it also shows to me that she's not blind, she's not dumb, and I think there's a possibility that she really was using Oliver and recognized that he has weird feelings about things and that she's not dumb about what's going on here, but is hoping that he chooses her in the end. Oh, and going back to Meredith's costume is fascinating because he describes her as a Grecian princess, which usually princesses, you defend them, you worship them, you protect them. They're more innocent, and Oliver is about to enter into his hero complex, protecting the people. Is that what he, at least in his mind, is justifying his actions for going forward and admitting guilt. But he, it also goes into what he's saying here, like, my throat seized up. What had I even meant to do? Protect her? Warn her? What? And like, what is he protecting her from? What is he warning her from? Because there's not a moment that he has ever really, like, James has ever threatened Meredith, really. Like, James doesn't like Meredith, but there's never been an instant where he's ever been violent or threatening towards her. He doesn't even acknowledge her. So what are you worried about? Besides maybe then Colburn coming for her and her getting caught. Maybe he's aware of that. That's what he wanted to protect her and warn her about. I don't know. But then he slams his open hand against the wall and the impact stung. That is his first reaction. Violence. He has done this time and time again. He has shown he is more violent than James and Alexander, for instance. He is the first one to initiate the assassination scene on stage with Julius Caesar and go a little too far. He is violent in these little moments, and he says things too, like that he just wants to squeeze or strangle, hurt people. He has told us that. He is the most like Richard out of the remaining men of this group. And that's why I question if maybe he has committed this crime. And the brilliance of it is that others have undermined him so much, underestimated him, assumed him this particular typecasting, that they never assumed that he would be capable of committing this crime, maybe. And to continue off what I just said, Oliver grabs James by the arm and starts pulling him away, saying, "We need to talk." And James says, "Now, let go, you're hurting me." Just as Richard had. Oliver gives us a quick sentence trying to decide where he's going to bring, James to have this conversation. Like, he can't go to the loading dock because Alexander and some other students are smoking. But, like, he doesn't want to go to the basement. And the basement is where he hid the weapons. But it's fascinating to me because basements usually are where you hide your secrets. That's where the monsters lie. That's why if you think of, like, Mike Flanagan shows, for instance, it's in the basement that, those creatures are hiding in Haunting of Hill House. That is where, those two siblings bricked in their boss and, the fall of the House of Usher. That is where you do crimes and hide secrets, not unleash secrets. So it then would make sense that you go out into the open and into the darkness, into nature, and that's where you reveal your secrets because you feel like it can be lost to the wind kind of sense. And also it sets a better scene, a scene more reminiscent to the scene that they're about to perform on stage for King Lear, where they're out under the stars on the bridge. So it's paralleling that scene too. When they go outside, Oliver says that the real sky was enormous overhead, making our mirrors and twinkling stage lights seem ridiculous. Man's futile attempt to imitate a god, and that's what's happening here. That is the point of the Sparrow quote. It is fate versus agency. It is taking the hands of God, playing God, deciding life or death. And that's what they've been doing this entire time. And it's fascinating that here he is pretty much just saying it without saying it, by saying it in the terms of their stage, pretending to do it. But that is what they've been doing this entire time. They've been doing a performance on a smaller scale, not realizing that they have been trying futilely to play the hand of God, and obviously failing. Because, like, take for instance, Richard didn't die quite easily. They are failing at this, and it's this, not humanity, there's a term for it, and I can't think of it, but that is a theme of Shakespeare's, learning that things are out of your hands, that you can't play God. You are human, you're a small player on this board. And like, yeah, I just like that he's telling us about telling us yet again. Oliver's reaction when James admits it was an accident, and he goes, oh, James, no, like, what did you expect? What did you expect when you got there with everything that your supposed evidence propped up against James, your anger, and the fact that you're coming to confront him? What did you expect? And you would think that he'd be like, it was an accident, great, I understand. But no, even with an accident, he is the tragic hero, which is the theme that James had said in the beginning in Act 1, when they're all listing different themes of tragedies. James is tragic hero, Richard's his tragic villain, Oliver says fate versus agency. And Richard is the tragic villain, and James is the tragic hero. He doesn't fit that perfect typecasting that Oliver has of James, and that is why he's upset. Because he's not perfect and honorable and moral and the thing to look up to. He is crumbling under his eyes right now. And even this, even though it was an accident, even though he was egged on, James can't see the crack, stop seeing the cracks now in this mask that he has been forcing James to keep up. Because underneath he is seeing the real person, no longer this typecasting, and he doesn't want to see that. That is why he is trying to force the others to cling to their typecasting, because he doesn't want to see the real people, because that scares him more. What also caught my attention is that he describes James in a very similar way to how he describes Meredith. He says James was colder, carved from ice, not my friend, naive and human. Whereas his actions and the way he's reacting leading up to that sentence is, he is having emotions. He is reacting in a panic and scared, and yet he's acting like he doesn't have emotions. He's describing, as he had described Meredith, as a marble, woman. That's how he described her in the previous scene, or 2 scenes ago. So, like, this is interesting. Like, why is he saying this when obviously we as the readers see it's not true? And maybe that's the point. That is for us to finally piece together that Oliver is lying to us and telling us things that are obviously not true. Because if you look at, like I said, what James had been doing, his words, his actions, he has emotions, and he is panicking. But Oliver is telling us, trying to gaslight us into thinking that James is this monster. So I think we are supposed to wonder, did James actually commit this crime, because his words are contradicting the actions? And continuing off what I just said, he describes him as cold and ice, and cold or carved from ice, but yet literally the next paragraph he says that he shook his head slowly, terror and awe indistinguishable in his expression. Doesn't compute. The math is not mathing for me, at least, because in this performance that Oliver has James giving, if we were to believe my theory, that James is saying that Bren had told him to go after him, that he'll hurt himself. But that doesn't make sense. Why now? In all these other moments leading up to Richard's death, we had moments where Richard was acting out and being miserable, as Meredith and Bren had described, and they avoided him. They reluctantly would go to him to see if he was okay, but when he was hot-tempered, they avoided him. When he was threw Meredith across the room, both Bren and Meredith avoided him, and that infuriated Richard more by being ignored by the 2 women of his lives. So why now? Why now would she send someone else, someone that she and everyone knows that he has been openly hating and almost killed him the night before? Why send him? So that makes me wonder, did that ever really happen? Is he rewriting, obviously, history to then have James commit this crime, forgetting that everything leading up to that point doesn't add up? Because why would that happen when usually it's Meredith or Ren going after him, and when he is really in a tizzy, they avoid him. And they all recognize that he nearly killed James before, so why would she send James after him? And why would James agree? I just love the continuous mirroring of scenes going on in this book. There happens so often, but literally in the beginning of the scene, when Oliver brings James outside and he looks back at the hill behind him a little afraid, it's because, like, for instance, in this moment here, James says that he climbed down the hill looking for Richard, and that led to his death. So, like, things like that is what's scaring James, because especially right now, Oliver shoved James, right? And then he looked down at the hill. So